We can put in as much time, effort, and research into constructing the perfect NCAA tournament bracket, but the mere atmosphere of March guarantees that no one will ever reach perfection. But that will never lessen the magic of March Madness itself. It's a celebration of a long season of college basketball and the unpredictability that comes with the game we love. And as we watch for upsets, Cinderella runs, and if blue blood programs can keep their legacies alive, the other side of the tournament is watching for potential NBA stars. Every season there are a handful of players that make it to the big dance and end up being one of the NBA's best. And there's even less of a chance that they end up making the national championship game. But what are the chances that both national championship finalists have future basketball Hall of Famers on their roster that would later meet in the NBA Finals? Let's explore this. My name is Caleb, and sometimes I just think about the rarest possible occurrences that can happen in basketball. I don't know where my brain goes to get there at times, but with March Madness being one of my favorite events of the year, I got curious and wanting to know how many times we've had future basketball Hall of Famers face each other in the national championship game in college, just to have a rematch years later in the NBA Finals. I understand it's a very specific scenario, but the fact that it's happened more than once and may never happen again for a few reasons is enough to do a bit of a deep dive on it. So with that being said, let's jump in. Because I've been a college basketball fan my entire life, I assumed I already knew the answer to this question, but I wanted to be sure. So I went through every national champion and every national championship runner-up to see how many players have won, made the national championship game, 2, made the NBA Finals, and 3, is inducted into the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame as a player. And out of 84 national championship games so far, I found only 24 players in total to fit this criteria, with a few more that will probably be added in the future. So it's a very rare company to have even done all 3 of these things. So let's now take it a step further. The most recent of these players to have played in a national championship game was in the 1983-84 season, showcasing how often this type of thing does not occur. Anthony Davis will more than likely be in the Hall of Fame one day, and because he has played in both a national championship game and an NBA Finals, he might be the only one and done player to accomplish this feat. But the one and done era is more than likely the reason this doesn't happen anymore. With less continuity in college basketball, we typically see older, more experienced teams in the NCAA Tournament Championship. While teams led by freshmen have broken through from time to time, there haven't been too many led by future Hall of Famers. Out of the 24 players who fit the criteria to be on this exclusive list, only 6 have gone against each other in the national championship game and then the NBA Finals years later. All 3 of these matchups give college basketball fans of the day decades of storylines and memories that fans would have to wait years to finally see the conclusion to. Themes of triumph, revenge, and redemption all play out in some of the most dramatic fashion that can only happen in a game like basketball. Let's take a trip back to the 1979 NCAA National Championship game, a matchup between the 2 players who would eventually be credited with saving the sinking ship that was the 1970s NBA. The number 1 seed Indiana State Sycamores, led by Larry Bird, a kid out of French Lick, Indiana, and the run and gun Michigan State Spartans, led by Irvin Johnson, appropriately dubbed Magic. The 1979 championship game was the most anticipated college basketball game of all time to that point, becoming the highest viewed American basketball game of all time. ISU went from unranked in preseason AP polls to the number 1 team in the country come tournament time after rattling off a 29-0 record. Larry Bird was supposed to be an Indiana Hoosier, but his quiet nature and need for a smaller setting landed him in Terre Haute, where he proceeded to average 30 points and 13 rebounds for the Sycamores throughout his 3-year college career, including a National Player of the Year in 1979. The Spartans came into the game with 25 wins on the year and ended the season 3rd in the AP poll. Magic Johnson really earned his name during his 2 years at MSU, going 7-8-7 with one of the most flashiest and entertaining styles of basketball you'll ever see at the collegiate level. He was no doubt going to be the number 1 pick in the 1979 NBA draft, after Larry Bird had already been drafted the year before to Boston, but decided to return for his final college season. The stars aligned, and here they were, 2 polar opposites in the championship game and what would be a first for both schools. The game plan was simple for Michigan State. Stop Larry Bird, and you pretty much stop everybody else. But you can't really stop Bird, you can only contain him. The game started out close, but as the Spartans began to double team Bird and make sure he touched the ball as little as possible, Magic and MSU would start to pull away. They'd have a lead as large as 16 in the second half, and the Sycamores would cut it to as little as 6 with around 10 minutes left behind a scoring run by Bird. But Magic was in the air that night as a late game takeover by the next #1 overall pick would carry the Spartans to their first national title in an 11-point win. Another national championship game was in the books, but this one felt different. There's always an aftermath that comes with a championship for both the winner and the loser, but this game was just the beginning of a story that would carry on for the next decade. Larry Bird was distraught after this game. He wanted it so bad, to this day calling it the toughest loss he's ever taken. But if anything, it gave him extra motivation once he got to Boston as the team's next superstar. On the other side of the country in LA, Magic was becoming something bigger than basketball. He won in high school, he won in college, now he was gearing up to win on one of the league's flagship franchises. The 1979-80 season was a two-man race for Rookie of the Year, and Bird would edge out Magic for one of the league's highest honors. The way Bird felt about the national championship game the year before, Magic felt about losing Rookie of the Year. As one of them won something the other one wanted so badly, it didn't do anything but add extra motivation to their next goal. After Magic lost out on Rookie of the Year, he'd just go out and win a Finals MVP as a rookie and win his first NBA championship. The only rookie to ever do this, Magic still wasn't satisfied. Something was brewing in the league. Beating Philly in the finals and his idol in Dr. J was really cool, but he wanted Boston. He wanted Bird. And Bird, again, wanted what Magic had. The Rookie of the Year, it was nice, but it was really nothing to him. And he'd go out and get a championship himself in 1981. Their NBA ring total was tied now, but he wanted to beat the Lakers. Another Lakers ring in 1982 saw Magic one-up Bird in the ring department again, and 2 years later, Magic, Bird, and the rest of the wider basketball world got what they wanted. A Lakers-Celtics NBA Finals and a rematch of the 1979 National Championship game. We'll refer to this as Magic Bird 1. The first of 3 finals matchups between the two rivals saw the Celtics grind out an NBA championship against their greatest foe in one of the best 7-game series in NBA history. A series that had 10 future basketball Hall of Famers lived up to the billing and contained iconic championship moments that fans of the day still bring up. Larry would not only win his second championship, but his first Finals MVP. The two were now tied in NBA championships, and Bird finally got his revenge after losing in the national title game 5 years earlier. The ball was in Magic's court now. How does he respond? Despite the storied rivalry, the Lakers had never beaten the Celtics in the finals. Magic wasn't only wanting to beat Bird for Magic, but for LA. Fast forward a year later, and the 1985 finals would see Magic Bird 2. The third time in 6 years, the two would face off for a championship. Bird and the Celtics seemed to have the upper hand on the Lakers again after Game 1 in a 148-114 win, a game that would be dubbed the Memorial Day Massacre. The Lakers would shake back completely though, and come back to win the series in 6. Magic had now broken the tie in championships between the two. Claiming the 1979 title and the 85 finals, Bird had the 1984 Revenge Championship to hang on to, and the rivalry between the two were peaking. The final Magic Johnson-Larry Bird face-off would come just 2 years later in 1987, the conclusion of rematches that all started back during their college days in 1979. The NBA was booming, and by 1987, people had chosen their sides. Magic and the Lakers would come out on top for the final time in the greatest two-player rivalry in NBA history, winning unanimous Finals MVP after going 26-13-8. From 1979 and throughout the 1980s, the game of basketball grew in ways that people never thought it could behind these two in their rivalry. The anticipation of seeing these two play against each other every year essentially saved the NBA, and what would be the first instance of two future Hall of Famers playing against each other in the national championship game and the NBA Finals. It's arguable that the 1980s was maybe the most talented era for college basketball ever, because in 1981, just 2 years after Magic and Bird faced off in the national championship game, we'd have our second instance of this rare occurrence. Two players who would find their way etched into the stories of our last matchup had no idea that it would start during their college days. In 1981, the Indiana Hoosiers and UNC Tar Heels were in the midst of some of their golden years. Bobby Knight and Dean Smith were reaching their primes as head coaches and would have some of their greatest players to ever grace their respective schools' uniforms. For the Hoosiers, it was sophomore Isaiah Thomas, the Chicago kid who made his way to Bloomington and became one of the country's best point guards. For the Heels, it was James Worthy. Also a sophomore, the North Carolina native was emerging to his own as one of the country's best. It was a matchup between 3-seeded IU and 2-seeded UNC, and what was seen to be a pretty even matchup all things considered. It was a back and forth game for the first half, and IU would take advantage of North Carolina's 19 turnovers and outscore them 36-24 in the second half for a 13-point win to give Indiana their 4th national title in school history. Isaiah led the way with 23 points and 5 assists, and it was extremely clear that he was NBA ready. So after the national championship, he'd leave IU for the 1981 NBA draft, being selected by the Pistons with the 2nd overall pick. Worthy wasn't quite ready to turn pro just yet. Having a fairly pedestrian championship game, he'd take the leap to become one of the country's best players in 1982, leading UNC's redemption run to the national title. The Lakers had the #1 pick in 1982, and it was Worthy that they'd choose to become the next piece to the Showtime Lakers. As Worthy would immediately join a winning team and be included in the battles with the Celtics and Larry Bird, he developed to the point where he'd etch out his own iconic moments, garnering the nickname Big Game James. While he was winning championships, Isaiah and the Pistons took a little longer to get there, but they developed one of the most distinct identities in league history as the bad boy Pistons of the mid to late 80s. Thomas's Pistons would have their own in-conference battles with the Celtics that finally saw them get over the hump in 1988 to the NBA Finals. As Bird and the Celtics began to get older and slow down a bit, the Lakers were still firing on all cylinders waiting for their newest opponent. 7 years later, it was Isaiah and the Worthy for the championship once again. The second time ever we'd see 2 future Hall of Famers that faced off in the national championship game just to rematch in the NBA Finals. Worthy would get his revenge and then some, putting on one of the best performances of his career thus far, going 22-7-4 to lead the Lakers to the championship and his first and only Finals MVP. Isaiah would have some heroic performances in this series, but the former UNC Tar Heel would get his revenge on the former Hoosier. Now tied in championships versus each other, the 2 future Hall of Famers would face off one last time for a ring in 1989. On maybe the greatest team in the history of the Pistons, Detroit, on paper at least, looked like they could actually beat the now fairly vulnerable and older Lakers. Despite multiple heroic performances from James Worthy, the Pistons would dominate and sweep the Lakers in 4 games. Isaiah had a great series, but it was Joe Dumars who would emerge as Finals MVP, averaging 27 a game for the series. Thomas broke the tie between the 2 legends and would win his first of 2 NBA championships. Pretty wild that the late 70s and early 80s would plant the seeds for matchups like this. And in the midst of all that, college basketball was in a big man revolution. The 1980s was a time for dominant centers across the country, with arguably its 2 best at the time being Georgetown's Patrick Ewing and Houston's Akeem Olajuwon. They were both going to be #1 picks in their own right when the time came, Olajuwon's being sooner. In 1984, he was a junior and had led the University of Houston to the national championship game the year before, losing a heartbreaker to the legendary 1983 NC State Cinderella team. But in 1984, with his running mate Clyde Drexler now in the NBA, he put the team on his back and get the Cougars back to the national title game as a consensus first-team All-American. This time, though, they'd have to face a Big East powerhouse and one of the most dominant college players ever in Patrick Ewing. The reigning Big East Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, and first-team All-American was now in his junior season and his second championship game in 3 years. The 1985 national championship game between the 2 All-American centers and the next 2 #1 overall picks planted the seeds for a rematch in the NBA Finals exactly a decade later. This time though, it was Ewing and the Hoyas who would get the best of Akeem and the Cougars. It would be Olajuwon's final collegiate game and a somewhat pedestrian but solid one at that, ending his college career with 15-9. Ewing on the other hand wouldn't have his greatest game either with 10 points and 9 rebounds, but was named the Final Four's most outstanding player. They disrupted each other to the point where they didn't have their best individual performances, which left many fans underwhelmed with the matchup. The Hoyas achieved redemption that night after losing on a Michael Jordan game winner 2 years earlier in the title game, and this time were on the other side of the championship coin. By many accounts, this game has kind of been forgotten in the college basketball lore because of the other games surrounding it. The 82 game with Jordan's game winner, the 83 game having the NC State game winner, and the 85 game where this same Georgetown team would be victim to one of the greatest upsets in college basketball history to Villanova. But Olajuwon, having now lost 2 title games in a row, pointed the finger. Known as a selfless player and amazing leader in his NBA days, he wasn't quite there yet as a 22-year-old college kid. He was livid and implied his teammates weren't passing them the ball on purpose. He'd take those losses with him to the league and be drafted #1 overall by Houston just a few months later. In 1985, Ewing would graduate from Georgetown and be drafted #1 overall to the Knicks, where he was positioned as the savior of the franchise. One of the biggest picks in NBA history, Ewing was going to bring winning basketball back to New York. Akeem would get his first chance at an NBA title against Larry Bird and the Celtics in 1986, a bridge to the last Lakers-Celtics finals of the decade. Though the Rockets would lose in 6 games, Akeem would assert himself as one of the best centers in the league, averaging 24 and 12 throughout his first finals appearance. Meanwhile, Ewing would win Rookie of the Year during the same season and give hope to the people of New York that things would finally turn around. There was no true rivalry between Olajuwon and Ewing, but anytime you can get a matchup between two of the best centers in the NBA, you were going to tune in. By the mid-90s, Akeem was now Hakeem and one of the best players in NBA history. The Rockets were in the championship mix every season and would finally get over the hump in 1994, reaching their second NBA Finals and first in 8 years behind Hakeem's first of 2 MVP seasons. Ewing was also establishing himself as one of the best big men ever, and that brought the Knicks out of their dark days and into contention in a gauntlet of an Eastern Conference. After beating the Pacers in the 1994 Eastern Conference Finals in 7 games, the Knicks were in their first finals in over 2 decades. With Jordan out of the league pursuing his baseball dreams, the mid-90s were going to be one of these big men for the taking, and maybe more interestingly, a rematch of the 1984 National Championship game, Olajuwon versus Ewing, a team from Texas and a team from out east. The amount of similarities outside of just the two players were insane. They were both looking for their first NBA championship and knew it would mean more if it were against the other. The 1994 NBA Finals was a back and forth affair that saw both teams get 2 games each during the first 4. Game 5 of the series is one of the most infamous games ever played, as the national broadcast would be interrupted by some random low-speed police chase from a couple of guys in white Bronco, but the Knicks would take a 3-2 series lead before Houston would bounce back in Game 6. Game 7, winner-take-all, saw Hakeem put up a near triple-double with 25, 10, and 7 to bring home the Larry O'Brien. One of the best center matchups in NBA Finals history, Olajuwon would finally get the best of Ewing for his first NBA championship. Avenging the 1984 National Championship game, he could finally put one of the lower moments of his basketball career behind him. And what would be only the third time individuals who played against each other in the NCAA championship game and the NBA Finals would eventually make the Hall of Fame. And it'd be the last time to this date this event has occurred. I have my doubts that we'll ever see this happen again because it was rare in the first place, but we haven't had something close to this happen since Ewing and Olajuwon back in '84. With one and done being such a prevalent factor in college basketball over the last 20 plus years, the best college players and in turn future Hall of Famers are leaving earlier than they did back in the day. There's just so much that needs to happen for this type of phenomenon to occur again, but I think it's cool that it's happened 3 times in general. Championships, matchups, storylines, all matter in basketball beyond the X's and O's, and it's so rare when we get repeat matchups that happen over the course of decades. My name is Caleb. If you want to support the channel, please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.